All right, so we're back from Vegas, but what we did was got some cinematic footage while I was there. It's been a crazy schedule. We had a 6-hour drive back today. I want to go through this video and talk about some quick tips to get cinematic footage. Now, I'm not saying these are the only ways to get cinematic footage. By no means is that true, but what these are very easy to implement tips. So what the goal of these tips are things you can incorporate as you're trying to get footage. If you have the tools available to you, or if not, it's certain ways you can think about framing your shots, certain ways to set up your camera prior to shooting. And with that, let's go ahead and dive in. The most important thing to figure out when you're doing footage is to figure out what is the focal point of each shot. What do you want your audience to leave with? By doing that, you can then figure out exactly how you want to approach each shot. Making sure that specific subject becomes in focus at some point is critical, and you want your audience leaving each shot with a specific message or feeling. That kind of ties into the second tip here, which is build your story. When you're getting each shot, how do you want them to all incorporate with one another, play into one another, so that way not only is it a cohesive timeline, but the images the user's seeing ends in a result with them feeling like they left with something. They felt like they were there with you. They felt like they actually were able to experience the same thing you were while you were shooting it. So figure out exactly in each shot what your focus is, and then figure out how to tie those together. Now, that doesn't mean you have to shoot your shots in a specific order. One of the great things is that when you're editing later on, you can figure out how to play that storyline together. By no means do you have to shoot shot A, B, C, and then play them back to the user like that. C, A, B, however it makes sense in the end result. Once you have all the shots, kind of play with them together and figure out what makes the most sense, what kind of introduces your audience to what you're shooting, and then ends on some type of payoff. Why did they watch this content? What do they want to leave with at the end of it? All right, so let's get a little more technical now and talk about some of the things we can do with different lenses and the shooting styles out of the cameras. When you think of cinematic shots, changing your framing is not something that really comes into play as much. So you may be moving around, but actually going wider and zoomed in doesn't really add that much. You can do things like a dolly zoom, yeah, but at the end of the day, it's much easier to do that in post, and you don't have to worry about some type of gimbal or stabilization as you're trying to do that in the real world. So this is the lens I love to use for it. It's an 85 f1.4. The other thing with the prime is you're gonna get a higher aperture, so it does allow you to play with kind of that focal depth, and that'll play into one of our later recommendations. Again, if you don't have something like this, try to shoot with a 50mm or beyond. What that does is really makes you focus in on something. As well, you get more of a depth of field while you're shooting, so it does really play into that overall cinematic look. Next thing we'll talk about is shooting in manual focus, and I'm a strong believer in this. What this lets you do is pick your focal point, and then if you want to come out behind a tree, come out behind a chair, it'll let you do that, and you know exactly what you need to be is in focus already. You don't want your camera necessarily changing focus, so if you're on the tree, you're trying to introduce a shot, and now it changes focus to the distance, it might not grab the right subject. On top of that, it just looks weird. So pick your subject. I do recommend using manual focus. That being said, our next tip is play with rack focus. So especially in bright environments and when you have these higher aperture lenses, you can really play with breathing in and out of what's going to be in focus in the shot. So we can take a look at the chair here. You know, it's really white, kind of blurry. You don't know what's going on. Then all of a sudden you can see Lena here in focus. You can tell she's sunbathing. It kind of adds that overall warmth to the shot because you feel like you're there a bit because you can see very specific details step by step, and then it introduces you to the next shot because everything kind of goes out of focus, and now we can transition very easily. Next up on your camera, and it's going to depend what kind of camera you have. Something like the EOS R isn't the best at this, but honestly, shooting at 60 frames a second, slowing it down to 50% is enough to do this. Ultimately, you want to shoot in a higher frame rate if possible. Even if you're going to play it back at normal speed, it does give you the option to slow it down later on. That's going to get rid of any handshake if you're doing a handheld shot. If you do have a gimbal, that's another recommendation, is make sure to use a gimbal. But at the end of the day, my run and gun style shooting, a lot of times I don't have the gimbal with me, so shooting in a higher frame rate has the added benefit of reducing visible shake in the shot. So you end up with these nice smooth scenes, and then at the end of the day, if you do have a little bit of shake at that point, you can apply stabilization in post. Last but not least, once you've built your timeline, once you put all your shots together, I sometimes do this before, other times I'll do it afterwards, but pick your music, add sound effects if it makes sense. These are just gonna really add that overall cinematic feel to the video, so by choosing the right music, that has a big impact on what you're feeling as you're watching it. I will sometimes, if I know I want to do transitions with a certain beat or with a certain audio selection, I'll pick the song ahead of time and then I'll build my timelines. You don't have to do that. You can build your scenes first and then later just kind of trim them depending on what the music is. And again, sound effects, it's something I personally have tried to get better with, but adding sound effects can make a big impact on some of your video as well. So use the ones built into whatever tool you're using. If it's Premiere or Final Cut, they'll have some canned ones, or if you use online services, a lot of those are great ways to get sound effects as well. Last but not least, if you need sound effects, use an audio recorder. Use your phone, use a Zoom. You have a lot of options. If you have to record maybe running water at the pool, just hold the mic up near the pool, get the running water, and use that later on. And the cool thing with that is you recorded it. You know it was actually a part of the scene you were filming. It's not something you just found online, but either way, it should help to add a nice dynamic effect to it. So that's it, guys. Quick video today. My upload schedule is becoming a little hectic with all the travel this weekend. We should be back this week trying to upload in the mornings, but I think it's going to take me a day or two to get there. I've still got to catch up on videos. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you left with some tips that you found helpful. Let me know any questions, any additional tips you guys have in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. I'll see you guys next time.